Welcome back to Life Without Secrets. In today's world, we're constantly surrounded by distractions, buzzing notifications, endless to do lists, and the pressure to do more and be more. It's no wonder so many of us feel stuck, overwhelmed, and anxious. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Rachel Langston. As the founder of Focus on Fewer, Rachel helps people cut through the noise, stop procrastinating, and start making real progress towards their goals. Her individualized coaching empowers people to align their time and energy with what truly matters. If you're ready to tune out the noise and regain clarity this year, this episode is for you. Rachel, welcome to Life Without Secrets.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know. We were starting our conversation and we were going so deep, and I'm like, this is so good. Hold on, I have to hit record. So I didn't want
Right.
you guys to miss out on all of the goodness that Rachel was already bringing to me over just to chat with her. So we went ahead and hit record. So here we are. And I can't wait to dive into all the amazing work that you're doing. I first want listeners to get to know you a little bit better. So, can you share something about yourself, maybe a personal experience or a fun fact that helps shape who you are and the journey that you're on today?
Sure. So I'm a middle-aged woman who just in the last year started my own business for the very first time. Had no idea that was coming. Spent my whole life loving school and loving everything about it and thought I wanted to be an English teacher for the rest of my life. But when I got out of school and got a job, it changed the trajectory of what I enjoyed doing and the way my career went. So that was many years ago, 30 plus years ago, and I've done a lot of different things. But after walking through some difficulties with our oldest child who started college during COVID, I discovered that I was an executive function coach and I didn't even know what one was. But so that's what I'm doing now. And just am having the time of my life. Love everything about it, even learning how to run the business side of it. So,
Yeah, which is a whole nother learning course.
right,
I
right.
mean, I'm with you there. Like, and it's fun. It's fun to learn. And I do think, though, like we were talking about the younger generation that's maybe growing up, they have a lot more noise and social media and
Absolutely.
notifications and endless tasks. And they're asked to do a lot of this stuff on their own. And they don't know how. I mean, some of us can't even manage
Right.
all of the notifications, the social media, the endless to-do list, the learning all these different things, starting something new. So, how do you think this constant stream of distraction is affecting our ability to focus and feel confident, and as well as the younger generation as well?
Well, it absolutely affects our ability to focus. And if you've read anything about social media or if you've watched any of the documentaries about social media, that's the intention behind it.
Mm.
And that it was created to keep people engaged. And the scrolling and the likes and all the things are do give our brain the dopamine hits that we want, and so it keeps us going back, and the more you do it, the quicker you're trying to go back. The idea of focus on fewer came to me because I've never been very good at multitasking, and I think what all the noise says to us is not only do you have all these things that you need to be, paying attention to, but they're all urgent and they all need to be dealt with right this second. And that is just not true.
Mm.
And so the idea of focus on fewer really is not that you don't need to deal and attend to all the things that you have responsibilities for, or even all the things that you're interested in, but it points to the fact that you really do only have limited attention at any given time. And so, what I try to talk to work with my clients on is not figure out what you can eliminate, although that may be part of the puzzle, but that's not really where we start. But figure out everything that is in your big picture and then narrow slowly by little, narrow your focus so that you're only dealing with a few things at one time. And when those are handled, then you move to something else in your big picture. You're not trying to think about everything all the time. Sometimes that involves, hey, you need to put your phone away. But that
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean that no technology, no screens, no nothing. I mean, I love technology,
Mhm.
and technology is an amazing tool. But the difference in somebody like you and I who grew up in a world without all of this technology, and then
Mhm.
we became adults and we've transitioned to technology. There's that side of the coin, and then we have our kids who don't know anything other than technology.
Right.
So, it's really disingenuous for us to say, "Hey, you gotta get rid of those screens." They don't know anything but screens. So, instead of saying, let's get rid of all the screens, we need to figure out how to manage the screens in a way that we focus our attention on the most important things at any given time. And then once that attention has been dedicated where it needs to, when it's time to move to something else, then we know how to do that effectively.
Yeah, well, it's such a good point too, because technology is not going to ever go away. So it's
No.
just learning, yeah, how to manage that and our time. And how do people start identifying what's truly worth their time or what's really their top priority right now? Like, let's say they do have a bunch of things on their to-do list. How do I figure out like what do I need to do right now and how do I do it effectively?
Well, I work a lot with college students and young adults, and one of
Mhm.
the things that because of their connections, shall we say, to their phones and their screens, like I said, everything feels urgent.
Mhm.
And so I have to start very basically, and sometimes it starts with, I want you to use a paper calendar. I want you to write down
Mhm.
specific things on specific dates, and if it's a college student, I say, "Go through your class syllabus and write down every date that has a test, every time you have an assignment due, every time you have a reading due. Write down everything, and then I have them look at that." The first time I ever did this was with my son, and he kept saying, "Mom, I don't know what the big deal is. I don't know why you want me to do that." And after he'd gotten through writing down all the stuff from his classes, I said, "Okay, now look at that calendar. Do you see that week where you've got 4 tests and 2 papers? That's not right now, but it's coming up, and you can't wait until that week to deal with those things." So when you use a paper calendar, instead of a calendar that you can only see 3 or 4 days at a time,
Mhm.
it gives you a visualization of time, and it gives you a way to say, "Ooh, that's gonna happen before that happens." And so then we start into the conversation of anything that's got a deadline, that's more important than something that doesn't have a deadline.
Yep.
Um, then we get into conversations about this paper is worth 50% of your grade. So you start out with valuing what has to happen in a time, what has to happen time wise and chronologically. And then we go from there to looking at value. If that extra credit assignment is only going to give you 3 points, don't do that until everything else is done. And so, I mean, it's a process. It's not a single
Mhm.
conversation, but and it depends on the client. Different clients have different needs. A lot of my clients have ADHD.
Mhm.
Everybody doesn't though. I've got
Mhm.
plenty that don't. Some of my clients are struggling with their grades, but others are not. They're struggling with the anxiety that comes from, I don't know how to organize all of this. I don't know where to start. And so I'm anxious because I don't have a plan, and I don't know where to I don't know where to go to get a plan.
Mm.
So it's very it seems like really basic stuff, but in some of the ways that technology has made our lives more efficient, it has made us deficient in the ability to organize,
Yeah.
because we don't understand some of the why behind what technology has done for us, if
Yeah.
any of that makes sense.
No, it absolutely makes sense. I am actually the person that has a paper calendar still, and that's exactly why I have it. Yep. I have a big one like that. She's just showing her big calendar she has on her desk, and I have one that I put in my backpack or in my car, and I carry it everywhere, and It also allows me this pause between, "Hey, can you do something on Friday?" And I say, "You know what? I don't have my paper calendar with me, and that's how I keep track of my things. So I'm gonna have to get back to you
Mhm.
and let you know if that's gonna work." And that actually it creates some space for you to think, and people will understand that, like, oh, well, she has to look at her calendar, and I'm not one. I hate using my phone for even there's things that, like, I have to schedule online, like
Right.
podcasting, for instance.
Right.
I have to send a link and people book on the show. From my link that they book, I put it in my paper calendar.
Exactly.
Because it's my central place that everything in my life goes between being a mom and having to know when practices for volleyball or basketball or football or whatever, to managing my time with my work and how that schedule changes, and then having to manage the podcast and when I'm available, when I'm not available, and when people are coming on. And then I look at that and go, okay, I have a podcast on Wednesday. That means I need to send an email on Monday, which means that I need to do the prep for that episode before that day. So it gives me a bigger picture. So I am a total with you on the paper calendar. In fact, my son started college this year as well. And that was the thing I gave him before he started. Now, has he used the paper calendar?
Right.
No, he hasn't opened it, and he's gotten through this semester okay, but next semester, I think is gonna be a little bit more challenging, so I'm hoping that he will. Is there a way to approach just for my own and anybody listening, maybe he's in the same point, like, when we know what our kids need sometimes, and they're a little resistant to try that because it's almost, like, foreign to this
Right.
generation, right? To
Right.
do something on paper because everything is on the computer at school. They even, like, from COVID, they've, like, taken pictures of their paper and then
Yeah.
turned it
Oh, yeah.
in. So how do we approach that?
Well, there is research that shows that the actual process of handwriting is helps your memory,
Mhm.
and
Oh,
it
for
helps
sure.
build the part of your brain that remembers things. And so
Mhm.
we know that there is a benefit, an actual benefit to writing by hand. Um, for me, a lot of times what that looks like, even if I don't necessarily carry a paper calendar with me, but when I've written a bunch of things on my calendar, even if I can't tell you exactly what's up, I can be like, there's something about the 12th. Like,
Mhm.
I need to
Mm.
check that because there's something in my head that says you've written down something on the 12th. So you can always talk to kids about how that it is helpful from a memory standpoint to use some paper. I actually use a hybrid of both. I do all of my work stuff is actually scheduled on a digital calendar for much the same reason yours is.
Mhm.
It's easier for people to get
Yeah.
the link and book me and that kind of thing. But a lot of my personal stuff and like some of the content that I produce for social media and my blog and all that kind of stuff, I do all of that written. I will say this, and I'm only half joking when I say that if you have a financial interest, if you're still supporting your kids financially, then in my opinion, you still have every right to demand their time, demand their attention, whatever. That said, at some point, we know our kids tune us out,
Yeah.
and there's just nothing you can do about that. So one of the things, and I think one of the reasons that I'm successful doing what I'm doing is that I'm a different voice. And
Mhm.
even though
Mhm.
I can say the exact same words that might come out of your mouth, your kid is going to hear it differently coming from me than they're going to hear it coming from you.
Yep.
And that's true with my own kids. And so there is something to be said for having different voices that can somehow attach themselves to your child, whether it's, hey, listen to this podcast because I thought this was interesting, or hey, I read this article and it made me think of you, or whatever. And it can be a little bit
Mhm.
stand back
Mhm.
instead of, here's this planner, you have to use it.
Yeah.
There's just some of it they're gonna have to figure out, and even though you and I can stand there and be like, "If he would just use a planner, his whole life would be easier." He's not gonna use the planner that you and I think he should because he's like, I don't, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's their idea, I'm out. I'm
Mhm.
ready to figure this out on my own.
It's so
And
true.
what I've discovered with now an adult child, 2 adult children, actually, I have one that just graduated from college and one that's about to, is that they're gonna try to figure it out, but then at some point, they're gonna circle back and they're
Mhm.
gonna be like, "Hey, tell me about that thing you were talking about," or "Remember that podcast you said you thought I should listen to?" Or we have a Friday night tradition with several of our friends and we all meet for Mexican and we've done it since our kids were in middle school. And so
Mm.
all through their high school years, our deal was we would buy their dinner if they came to eat with us on Friday night. And so whether they were going to dates or parties or whatever, they would start their Fridays with us and they got to know all of our friends.
Mm.
And so even just having people around you that they know that maybe aren't gonna say the exact same thing that you would say, but that would point them in the same direction, or that might say, "What? You need some help with learning how to organize." Whereas
Mhm.
if you say that to them, they're like, "I can organize fine. I don't know what you're talking about."
Right.
It's just having different voices and different perceptions. Sometimes they get it from an instructor. Sometimes they get it from somebody else's mom.
Mhm.
And the bottom line is you don't really care where it comes from if it's gonna move them to where they need to be. My husband laughingly, jokingly says, "You really should have named your business Another Mother." Because
I
in a
love
lot
that.
of ways, you're
Yeah.
doing for other kids that type of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, okay, you've talked a bit about, or I've heard you talk about focus blocks, right? Which are maybe you could explain those. And then I do want to know, like, do you have any tips for maintaining focus during these blocks after you explain it, especially when distractions these days are so tempting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, that's gonna look different for every person, but, like, if you've got an ADD kid or you've got an
Hmm.
ADHD diagnosis, then one of the issues there is maintaining focus for a long time.
Hmm.
And so you want to figure out, and whether this is you figuring it out for yourself or whether it's with the help of a doctor or a parent or a counselor or a therapist, what's your sweet spot? Can you work in 30-minute segments? Can you work in hour segments? And also think about like one of the things I have my clients do is an informal energy audit. And I'm like, think about when are you the most energetic? When is your
Hmm.
brain the clearest? When are you the most productive? And for some people, that's in the morning. And for some people, it's in the afternoon. And some people, it's at 10 o'clock at night. And it doesn't really matter when that is. But if you're aware of it, then you can work your schedule around those high energy times or those high focus times. And so I can work all day. I could sit here for hours and never need a break. Everybody can't do that. So when I talk about focus blocks, it's like maybe it's a morning routine. Maybe I've been reading a book by Cal Newport called Deep Work, where he basically turns the phone, there's nothing on, and it's just him and his laptop or him and his journal and no interruptions for like an hour and a half first thing in the morning. And it's whatever those blocks end up looking like, the time frame that works best for you. I would guess an average would be 30 minutes to an hour, no distractions. And if that means your phone needs to be in another room, if that means that you need to sit at a kitchen table with nothing but a notebook and a pen, whatever that looks like, and you have one task. And so my every bit of my attention is focused on this one thing for this amount of time. And then you take a break, and not a 3-hour break necessarily, but maybe you get up, walk around. Maybe you get up and drink a cup of coffee. Maybe you stand outside for 10 minutes. Maybe you listen to a podcast for 10, whatever it is, just switch gears. Okay, now my brain's not thinking about that anymore. And then you go to the next part of your day. If that high focus time is one of your big energy moments, then schedule your things that don't take as much mental capacity for a different time. Answer your email, check your social media, all those. And maybe you do that while you're listening to a podcast if that kind of distraction doesn't bother you. I've started putting my phone away about an hour to an hour and a half before I go to bed at night in a different room to charge. And I use that time to read. And just because I enjoy reading, not
Mhm.
because I'm trying to do it for any kind of an assignment or anything, but it has made a huge difference, not only in my focus, but it's made a big difference in the quality of my sleep
Mhm.
because I'm not having to amp down once I put my phone away because I've built in some time to do that. And when I get ready to go to sleep, I go to sleep.
Yeah.
And so some of it is figuring out how to hack yourself but some of it is just again, it's slowing down and it's focusing on, you know what? This I only have to do if I do these 3 things today, anything else I accomplish is over and above.
Yep.
So again, it's not to say I'm never going to do those other things on my list, but here are fewer priorities for my day. And once I finish those, then let me see what else is on the list and if that's something I can accomplish. As far as maintaining it, again, very individualized. I don't like to exercise. I don't like to sweat and I don't like to be hot.
Mm.
And I live in Alabama, so it's usually
Humid.
hot. So I can do really well in terms of maintaining the discipline of doing that in spurts. But then I'll get tired of it, or I've got something that doesn't feel right, and I think, oh, I don't need to exercise today. Some of that comes down to just personal discipline. Some of it comes down to creating a system and a routine that you just, this is what I do next. This is what I
Mhm.
do next. And when I'm starting that process with somebody to create that system, I don't really associate time with it unless it's something where they have to be at a class at 8 a.m. or 12 p.m. or whatever. But I tell them to don't focus on what time everything is. Focus on this is what I do. And then after that, I do this. And then after that, I do this. And so it's building sort of a chronology. And then later on, you can go back and assign times to it. So when I get up in the morning, what do I do first?
Mhm.
Right. And then what do I do next? And
Yeah.
then what do I do next?
Yeah.
And especially for kids and students and young adults that deal with ADHD, the consistency of the routine is very helpful.
Mm.
For college kids, I say, okay, you need a Monday, Wednesday, Friday routine and you need a Tuesday, Thursday routine. And let's say they have on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, their first class is at 9, but on Tuesday, Thursday, their first class is at not till 10. I tell them, get up at the same time, no matter through Friday, and whether you take a little longer at breakfast or whether you spend 30 minutes going over your notes before class instead of after class, because you want that consistency. And the more you're consistent in what you do and when you do it, then the easier it is to maintain.
Yeah.
You want the balance of you're not being thrown off if something doesn't happen right when you thought it would, or you have a Monday through Friday routine and then the weekend screws you up. You got to figure out what that balance is because things happen. There's traffic and
Flexibility. You
yeah,
have to be.
so that's down the road and what we talk about, but consistency is a big help with maintaining it. And I will say this just as a side, and this is not what young people want to hear, but the importance of sleep is
Mhm.
important to the consistency.
Yes.
They again, a lot of research that says that adequate sleep is what our brain needs. It's what our body needs. And all of the things that we do during the course of the day, we are better and more effective if we are well rested. And our brain works better if it's well rested. So
Yep.
all of it works together. I mean, it's almost like God had a plan when he created when he
You're right.
created our bodies.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. Well, it's funny because I've always see those memes. It's like when you fight your parents to go to bed at 9:30, like that is I'm not gonna go to bed at 9:30 when I'm older. And then you get older and you're like, turns out bedtime really is 9:30.
right,
I'm so
right.
ready to go to bed.
Yeah, or you look at the clock and you're like, "Oh, it's only 8.
Yeah.
Can I can I even make it to 9?"
Can I even make it to
Yeah,
9?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I also wanna talk about because there's a lot of pressure in the world to, like, be everywhere, do it all, like, dive deep, get it do everything and be everywhere. It's just there's a lot of pressure, not just for young adults, but everybody. And especially, I think, with social media, that is even more of a thing because then it's like, "Oh, look, we missed out." We all have a little bit of FOMO. How do how do we deal with this pressure that the world has to do it all, be it all, figure it out right now, do it right now, do everything right now? It's like and I think that's the other thing with social media, it makes it look like people were an overnight success too, and so it's hard then when we figure out, "Well, that took me 10 years to build," and then like you were talking in the beginning too, like, it might take you 10 years to build, and then you get there and you're like, "I don't really wanna do that."
Right, right.
That's the other thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of that may be a whole different podcast, but a lot of it has to do certainly with your self-awareness.
Mhm.
It has to do with what you know about what you're willing to do in terms of friendships. How deep do you want to go? I've never been my personality is not such that I have always wanted to be all up in the middle of everything. So for the people that do have a personality like that and do really struggle with FOMO, which is a real thing, again, I think you only have so much capacity. You only have
Mhm.
so much emotional capacity, relational capacity, physical capacity. And so at some point, you've got to decide, okay, this is what I can do. And then I'm not doing anything else. And so maybe that means you do a lot of different things, but you don't do them all at the same time. Maybe you do this for this season of your life and then you do something else. Maybe you don't do as many things just in general. And you were talking about all the different roles that you have.
Yeah.
But you're working out a schedule so that you allow the things that you really want to be involved in to coexist.
Yeah.
And I do think I have a love-hate relationship with social media because there are some benefits to it, but
Mhm.
I do think it gives our young people in particular, but even people my age, this idea that you can be everywhere and do everything, and that's just not true.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to say to ourselves, "Hey, you're limited. You're one person. You have 24 hours in a day, and you're limited. Everybody else is limited too. And we have to figure out and be willing to tell ourselves sometimes that what we see on our phones and on our screens is not real.
Yep.
And even if it's real for a moment, it's not sustainable.
Mhm.
And honestly, I think that's where some of our young people are getting so anxious and lost is not really the right word, but they're so overwhelmed because there's no voice in their life that's saying, "That's not real. That's not sustainable." And not only do I see it with college kids, but I see it with young adults who all of a sudden they're out of school, they graduate, and they go to work and they go home and they have these hours and they're like, "I don't know what to do with my time." They don't know, like, when you say find a hobby, they're like, "A what?"
Yeah. Mhm.
They don't know what that is because all they've ever done in their downtime is look at a screen. And so it's an interesting phenomenon that we've created, but we're also going to have to figure out how to manage because the mental health issues are skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with a book called The Anxious Generation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's so good.
It's
Everybody needs to read
it's
it.
a whole thing.
Yep.
And yeah,
Actually have it right here on my table to the side over here.
every grown-up needs to read it, every
Yes.
child needs to read it,
Yep.
every employer needs to read it. people
Yep.
without children need to read. Look, because this is this is what's coming.
Yep.
And even if you don't have a child that's dealing with some of this stuff, you're going to have a neighbor, you're going to have a babysitter, you're going to have an employee who is dealing with the ramifications of what the author calls a phone-based childhood.
Yep.
I mean, to hear me talk, you would think that woman hates technology. I really don't. I
Mhm.
love what it enables us to do, but I think we're selling ourselves short and we're destroying some aspects of our culture and our society by not being honest about the effects of it.
Yeah. No, I'm 100% with you on that, and I do think that everybody needs to read that, especially when you're raising children as well, and knowing what the real consequences
Mhm.
of the choices that we make for our kids and allowing certain things. So I'm
He makes the point that the first group, which our kids probably fall into that
Mhm.
kinda test group of, we didn't know this is what would happen.
Right. Right. Yeah,
And
totally. That is so
so,
arctic.
you can say, "Okay, well, I didn't know that if I did this, they were gonna have these issues." What I find is interesting is now we know and we have evidence to show, "Hey, this is what happens." And the last part of his book is that it's gonna take collective action. It's not just that I can say my kids aren't gonna do it and you can say
Mhm.
your kids aren't gonna do it. It's that it's not really gonna make any difference if our society doesn't embrace. And so I'm more interested, I'm fascinated and a little bit discouraged by the fact that we know what would help fix this problem. Are we willing to do it?
Yeah.
And
As a society,
unfortunately,
as a
as a
community.
society, are we willing to do it? And I
Yep.
think the answer is probably no, and which is discouraging to me because
Yeah.
he
Well,
knows. Well, now
I think it's a not yet though, because I think people haven't quite woken up, and the only reason why they haven't woken up, I think, is the exact reason why we're having this episode right now, is that there is so much noise in the world, so many
right.
distractions that people are not taking the time to pause and actually think about what is in that book.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's easier to just fly by the seat of your pants and think that it's gonna all work out anyway because Joe Schmo did fine,
Mhm.
rather than saying, "Is this really what I want to for my child? Is
Right.
this really what I want in my community? Or would I rather stand next to somebody that is willing to pause, take a step back, and then fight for their kids and the future?"
Yeah.
And I think it's harder. It's so much harder to do the latter, right? It's so much harder to
Absolutely.
pause and then make changes because we live in such a fast-paced world that, like, I mean, there's and in a world that is also fighting financially, most people, right? And so what does that mean? It means that 2 people are working outside the home many times,
Yeah.
or maybe they're working one inside and one outside the home, but they're still working. And so it's so much easier to be like, "Here's an iPad to keep you busy
Mhm.
so that I can get my work done because we can't afford our bills."
Parenting without screens is
Mhm.
way more inconvenient than
100%.
parenting with screens.
Yep.
And he makes that point in the
Mhm.
book. And it's an interesting dynamic. I also think it's interesting. I wonder once the younger generations understand their relationship with technology and I don't know that they recognize how distracted they are
Mhm.
because they don't know how to be bored. We were allowed to be bored when we were growing up, and
Yep.
I don't know that they realize that they're distracted all the time. But I'll be curious to see, like, I wonder if my kids will parent differently knowing what they know
Mm.
about technology and social media and that whole addictive framework that really was built for that very reason, to keep
Yeah.
us looking at our phones. I read something recently and the guy referred to our kind of the season we're in as the attention economy, and that
Mhm.
the way people make money is to get our
Grab your
attention and
attention.
maintain it.
Yep.
You and I deal with that as well.
Uh-huh.
How can I get people to see what I'm posting? How can I get them to
Mhm.
engage
Mhm.
with what I'm doing? And so that's really what it is, an attention economy.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a such a good word for it too, and it's absolutely true. One other thing that I wanna touch on because I think it's really important, and you said something really powerful before we got on here that I think is really so true in the way that we look at the future, because 'cause we're talking about that right now, is young people and honestly ourselves, right? Like, at any age. Sometimes we decide we wanna do something, and then years later, we don't like what we're doing, or we feel like we have to figure everything out now in order to have a good life later. So, we have to commit to something and stay committed,
right,
and obviously in relationships, that's great, but then there's jobs and things that we get into, and then we end up not feeling happy, or not necessarily not feeling happy, but not feeling fulfilled in that job, or it wasn't what we thought it was going to be, or it's not a good environment for us,
right.
and what we really want to accomplish in life and in the world. What do we do? How do you feel about that?
So, one of the first things that I did when I decided to start my own business was get a business coach because I knew I
Mhm,
didn't know what I was doing in that side of things. And the first thing she asked me was, "What does success look like to you?" And it I wasn't expecting that, but it was such a clarifying question
mhm,
because what I realized was I want to do work that's meaningful. I want to be able to make some sort of financial contribution to my family,
mhm,
and I want to be in control of my schedule.
mhm,
And that's what success looked like for me. It wasn't a dollar amount. It wasn't a certain address or location or status associated with a title or anything like that. And so what I find with a lot of my clients, especially the college kids and the young adults, is that they have this idea that they've got to make a decision
mhm.
about what they're gonna be and that they're gonna do that forever.
Yeah.
And there was a time in our culture, in our country, where that was the thing. I mean, you went to the office for 40 hours a week and you worked for the company for 40 years and you had a pension and they gave you a watch when you retired and that was the end of it. And that's just not the reality that we face. It's not the same job market that you and I entered.
Yep.
And because I was interested in something else and was able to learn other things at various times in my life, I have a career today that I had no idea was even a thing. And I'm 57 years old, and I've
Mhm.
just now figured out what it is that I think I want to do with the rest of my working life.
Yeah.
But here's the other piece of that puzzle. Everything I've done from the time I graduated from college, everything I've done as a career, and all the time I spent as a stay at home mom has given me the experience and the perspective to be able to do what I now know I want to do. And
Mhm.
so when I talk to kids that are like, I don't even know what I want my major to be. I'm a business major, but I don't even know if I signed up for that.
Mhm.
I don't say to them, what do you want to do? I say to them, what are you willing to learn how to do?
Mm.
Because if you can let yourself figure out what you're interested in, and if you're willing to learn, then you may stumble into something that is a career that you didn't even know was a thing.
Right.
And we've talked a lot about technology. Technology changes so fast.
Yeah.
And half of what I do now, half of what I've done for the last 10 years, and certainly what I did for the first 10 years of my career was learning how to use different types of technology and learning how to use different tools to do the things that needed to be done. So, yes, a lot of people need a college degree. In a lot of ways, it's a ticket to a job interview.
Yep.
But a college degree in and of itself is not necessarily what it was when you and I
Mm.
were going to college because that's what everybody did. Now, if
Right.
you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a
Mhm.
pharmacist, there's certain, yes, there's a trajectory. But if you're going to own a business, you can have an English degree.
Mhm.
If you're going to do something with your hands, you may not even need to go to college. You may be able to
Mhm.
do an apprenticeship. Um, if you don't want to sit behind a desk all day, you don't need to go sit in college for 4 years. And so I think we're asking the wrong questions. And I think we're making our kids anxious without knowing that we're doing it. And we don't have to. If we can just step back and say, okay, what do you want your life to look like? Do you want to have a job where you go to work in the morning and you come home at night? Do you want to sleep in the morning and work at night? Do you want to be in an office? Do you want to be the boss? Do you want to talk to people? Do you not want to talk to people? I mean,
Mhm.
what it figure out what you want your life to look like and then figure out how to get from where you stand right now to what you want that life to look like. And if your vision, if your definition of success is I want to work, I want to be in control of my schedule and I want to have some do something that's meaningful and I want to make some sort of financial contribution, it can be very basic. If you wanna be the next Taylor Swift, that's a whole different conversation.
Right.
But don't spend a lot of time trying to fit in a box that isn't even the right box anymore.
Mhm. I hate when people try to put me in a box. That's why I do so many different things.
And I think too, there again, please don't take away from this that I hate social media, but social media is a way of putting yourself in a box.
Yes.
And the
Mhm.
reality is that there's a few people at the very top and a few
Mhm.
people at the very bottom, and the rest of us are somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And nobody is going to care what you do, how you spend your days. Nobody's going to ask you if you're happy or if you're fulfilled or whatever. I still say to my kids, we have two expectations. I think you can tell faith is important to us. And so I used to say, we want you to love Jesus and we want you to pay your own bills. And that's
Love
it.
it.
And
That's great.
if you don't have a lot of bills, if you have a basic lifestyle, you don't have to have some super fancy job, you
Yep.
know? And so, but nobody else is going to you're going to have to advocate for yourself as far as this is the life I want and this is what I have to do to get there. And if you get there and you don't like it, you're the only one that can change it.
Mhm.
And so be willing to learn what you have to learn or take the risk that you have to take to change it if you get there and you don't like it.
Yeah. Such great advice right there. It's so true. And I am that type of person, right? Where I like to put myself in uncomfortable positions because not like to a degree that makes it so I'm learning, right?
Right.
And I think it's important. I always wanted to be a lifelong learner. And I watch my grandma, who's 106, and she was always reading and doing something with her time. And I want to be like that. Like at 96, she decided she's going to clean the beds at the urgent care. So that's what she did, just giving her time and doing something new, which I think is really cool. So,
And the reality of our society is if you're not a learner, you're going to struggle in terms of being a worker because things are changing very quickly.
yeah.
And the work that our economy is based on is changing very quickly. And so no matter where you start, even if you're a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher, there's always learning that you have to keep up with.
Yep.
There's always new techniques, there's new
Yep.
drugs, there's new things that you have to stay on top of. So the best thing you can do is learn how to be a learner.
Yeah. Absolutely. Be open and
Yeah,
flexible.
and get out of your mind that learning is sitting at a desk and learning.
Mhm.
Because I think people that are like, "I'm not really good at school," or "I hate school," or whatever, think, "Well, I don't wanna be involved in learning." But that's learning isn't that anymore.
No.
Learning is
Learning could be learning how to talk to someone, or
yes,
for me, it's like learning how to work well under pressure. Like, those are skills I can take anywhere.
exactly, exactly.
So, yeah, I totally agree. Well, how can people connect with you from here?
Well, my website is focusonfewer.net, and that has all the information about my coaching and all the services. In 2025, we're going to expand and do some online classes and some group coaching.
Oh, cool.
So, all of that is coming up. And I have a Substack, and so it's focusonfewer.substack.com. And my email is rachel@focusonfewer.net. One of those three ways you can connect with me. So anytime anybody wants to talk about potential coaching, all of those conversations are complimentary, but all the fee structure and everything's there. And I'd love to help if there's any way I can.
Love it. Well, thanks so much for coming on here with us and sharing all your insights and all your helpful strategies for really everyone, not just the younger generation. But I think we're all struggling a little bit with adapting to the noise of the world. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing.
I appreciate you having me.
Of course. Life today is full of noise and distractions, but as we've explored in this episode, it doesn't have to stay that way. Whether it's carving out focus blocks, learning to say no, or decluttering the digital chaos, small intentional changes can lead to big transformations. Remember, it's not about doing everything, it's about focusing on fewer things that truly matter and align your energy with your priorities. Thanks for joining us on this journey of growth and discovery. If this episode resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on one step you can take today to bring more clarity and purpose into your life. And as always, share this episode with someone who might need a little encouragement to focus on what matters most. Together, we can navigate life's chaos and create a path that feels meaningful and fulfilling. Hey there, it's Jillian from Life Without Secrets. Ever feel like you and your partner aren't quite on the same page? Well, you're not alone, and that's exactly why I created our latest issue of Truthful magazine. It's packed with insights and stories about bridging that gap and finding a deeper connection. We're diving into real conversations about needs, feelings, and how honest dialogue can rekindle that closeness that you've been missing. Why not explore this together? Go grab your free copy right now at lifewithoutsecrets.com and turn those pages into shared moments. Can't wait for you to dive in and share your thoughts with me.